Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Squid Game Season 2. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Patrick, last week on this podcast, we recorded very early on the day that Squid Game Season 2 came out. We watched one episode and then talked about it. And usually I like to have time to marinate on the episode. I'll read about it, I'll research, I'll read recaps. And didn't have any time to do any of that. And as a result, some mistakes were made that I will be correcting on this week's episode of the podcast. The one big one is that I mispronounced the main character's name. That was very bad. His name is pronounced Sung Gi-hun, and not Ji-hun, which is how I pronounced it. And so I apologize for that. I will tell you, I watched a somebody recap season 1 of Squid Game, and they pronounced it Ji-hun, and I trusted them because I thought, hey, it's this person's job to know this stuff, and I was wrong. So lesson learned. Never gonna trust that person
Time to
again.
go back to the tried and true. You look at you go to youtube.com, you look
Yeah.
up interviews with an actor, and you
Yeah.
slowly scrub through like the
Right,
actor
them
introducing
saying, yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And so you could be like, is that right? If I'm gonna be wrong, I want to be wrong this
Well,
way.
it's not even the actor; it's literally the character. So I literally just need to watch and listen anytime somebody says his name in the show, and I failed to do that. So I feel bad about that. I'm very sorry. Also, I was gonna try to get David Cho on the podcast this week because he is Korean, has a lot more context about this show than I do. He was able to give me a lot of information that I'm going to share during the course of this podcast, but sadly, the timing did not work out. However, I nonetheless am still really looking forward to talking about this with you, Patrick Klepek. So I have more corrections and context to provide, but first, let's just start by talking about what you thought about season 2 overall. Do you think it's a worthy follow-up to season 1, Patrick Klepek?
Get back to me in June of 2025, I guess is the short answer. I think the first 2 episodes of this show are pretty spectacular and interesting and gesture at a season that throws out a lot of the rules, structure, construction, motivations, like try something completely different. After the first 2 episodes, we head back to the games and we're into something that I think tries its best to do something interesting within a formula, but is nonetheless a formula. And by the end of that season, we end in a really frustrating place because this does feel kind of like how we worried. It feels like a part 1. It doesn't feel like a proper finale. Does not feel like a conclusion. It feels like it arbitrarily cuts off in the middle of a season and then is holding those episodes hostage until June. And they called it a season 2 and a season 3. But I don't know how they actually produced these episodes, how they thought about them internally and written them. I can only react to it as a viewer. And I found myself pretty frustrated by the end. I find the show struggling to search for an identity within that formula, and I don't know that it fully succeeds, but it's still really entertaining. There's a lot of great moments, some really good characters, and so it's not a waste of time. I think it's similar to how we've talked about Skeleton Crew. I expected better, and so it doesn't hit nearly the highs of season 1, but if you watch the first season, you'll enjoy season 2, but I'm hoping that season 3 will create a bigger, more interesting, and more complete picture by the end.
Wow. Patrick, I have to say I disagree. I loved season 2. I agree with you that it does feel like half a season, and that is not great. But I was expecting season 2 to feel like a warmed over rehash of season 1 in a bad way. And I saw folks like, for instance, Alan Sepinwall post season 2 is solid, but really it only exists because the creator of the show did not get paid very well for season 1, and that's why he wanted to make a season 2. And when I saw posts, first of all, that's all accurate. Like, he wasn't paid very well, and that's why season 2 exists. But I was thinking, oh, this is going to be like he phoned it in. No new insights here. Executionally, maybe if it's not that good. Disagree completely. I think there are new insights to be gleaned from the show, and not only that, but they've introduced this whole new cast of characters who you do connect to and you do root for. And so yeah, I think season 2 is a big success. That said, Patrick, I think a lot of people feel the same way you do. They feel like, oh, this is a remix of season 1. It's kind of just feels like, oh, why are we doing this again? But yeah, where you and I do agree is it does feel like half a season, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Okay. So I want to start by reading this email from Eric, who writes into decodingtv@gmail.com from San Francisco. Eric had lots of great insights to share about the show. And I usually don't like to read an email this long, but it's a great email, so I'm going to read the whole thing. So I already talked about my pronunciation of the main character's name. One thing you didn't mention about the recruiter, Eric writes, is that he is an actor named Gong Yu. He's the main character in Train to Busan, and he's probably one of the few actors in Korea that is nearly on the same level as Lee Jung Jae and Lee Byung Hun.
Oh my god, I did not put that together. I love Train to Busan.
Yeah, but Gong Yu is primarily known for being a romantic lead, and he has a very wholesome image in Korea. So seeing him as a psychopathic villain with no empathy for homeless people is a huge departure from his image, making him stand out even more than he did in season 1 when he was just slapping people.
That's so good. That is some terrific casting.
Secondly, the people that Gi-hun hired are not private investigators. They are his loan shark gangsters that he owed money to in the first season. This is my bad. I didn't make the connection. Again, we watched it and talked about it real soon afterwards, and I didn't have time to kind of get that all process that information. But anyway, they mentioned that he paid back his debt and that he hired them. The loan sharks also mentioned in the first episode that a lot of their debtors have been disappearing. So the loan sharks have been losing a lot of money, presumably because so many of their clients have been taken to go play in the games and died. Third, the motel that Gi-hun bought is a love motel, not a regular motel, which is why that random couple wanted to go in. They were looking to rent a room and have some fun. And then finally, Eric continues. This is some more spoilery details from the show, and some of the real life actors that appear in Squid Game season 2. Thanos, the rapper, is portrayed by Top, or T.O.P., a K-pop boy group rapper who was canceled in Korea a few years ago for smoking marijuana. His past career was probably a big reason why he was chosen for the role of Thanos. I'm going to pause here for a moment. A lot of people have been reacting to the fact that Thanos is a rapper in real life and that he had a huge scandal because he took drugs in real life. And in the show, he plays a rapper who takes drugs, and how that's kind of a really, bold. I'm trying to think of a comparison for that, right? What would that be in America? I mean, the one comparison that comes to mind is Eminem in 8 Mile. That's a semi-autobiographical movie, but this would be you're in something and then it's pointing attention to the thing that you were canceled for.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think, I think in this case, we're using the term canceled in its most cultural. It's appropriate in the sense of that's how we think of it. But he was smoking weed. Who gives a shit? It's a reflection of Korean
in America.
Yeah. But I mean, I do think.
I had a comparison, by the way. Is Nicolas Cage in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. That was that's kind of a relatively close to that. That's kind of a comparison for that. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, Patrick. But
I just wonder if there's the reason you double down on it is, look, I might be canceled here, but Squid Game is a worldwide phenomenon.
Exactly.
You do this, and I mean, I got to imagine people looking it up, but well, actually, that's kind of that's like you said, pretty bold, pretty cool. That's the character you would choose. And it's not a one-off. It's a defining trait of this character and how they manage their way through the games. It's a bold move, but I respect it.
Contestant 100 in Squid Game, the old man, is notorious in Korea for being a man who ran away from the country for committing some truly heinous crimes. I won't go into detail here, but you can look it up. Most likely a big reason he was chosen to play such a loathsome role. Again, taking a break too. Basically, a lot of a lot of the actors in Squid Game season 2 are problematic in some way, and sometimes their problematicness is reflected in the character that they actually play. Okay, moving on. Back to the email. Shamanism is still alive and well in Korea, with many political figures having infamously used shamans as guides for the various political policies they pursue. So the shaman contestant may be seen as a quack by some of the contestants, but nobody blinks twice at her because it is still a profession that is venerated by many in Korea. Kimbap, the rice roll meal given to the contestants prior to the bathroom fight, is typically not served with a fork. Kimbap is either eaten with chopsticks or with your hands. Clearly, the forks were given with the kimbap to motivate the fights and killings to happen in the night. Also, I know the frontman's alias is kind of explained in the show, but it was so quick that I want to make sure it's understood how clever/dumb the name is. Oh Young Il is the frontman's fake name. Oh, obviously similar to Zero. Young is one of the ways people say zero in Korean. Il is one of the ways to say the number one in Korean. So put together, Oh Young Il basically is a gag on 001. It's also a clue that Gihan should have picked up on, that contestant 001 was a mole and not a real person. The name is much too coincidental to be natural. There's also a funny joke that Gihan's surname is Sung, which is a word that also means surname in Korean. Basically, that whole conversation about names is just a bunch of dad jokes based on puns. Contestant 120, Hyunju, is a trans character that is portrayed by cisgender actor Park Sung-soon. The creator of the show stated in an interview that he wanted to cast a trans actor for the role, but ultimately he felt that having one in the show might actually put the actor in danger in Korea due to how conservative the country still is, especially for such a high-profile role. Park Sun-sung has also portrayed villains in many prior Korean dramas, so it really was nice seeing him portray such a heroic and awesome character in season 2. Hopefully this will open more doors in the future and allow trans actors to portray trans characters in future endeavors in Korean cinema and TV. A beautiful moment in the show is when Young-mi calls Hyungju Unni, which means big sister in Korean, specifically used by women to other older women that they are close to. Calling Hyungju Unni shows that they accept her as a woman, not as a man. It's a subtle way of showing that, but one that a Korean would immediately recognize as important. There are so many other nuances in the show that will likely get looked over, but those are some of the ones I think are important or interesting. I hope this has been enlightening for you. I'm very much looking forward to season 3. End quote. That comes from Eric from the Bay Area, writing into decodingtv@gmail.com. Eric, thanks so much for the lovely email. That was very fascinating and valuable, and appreciate all that. I want to give a shout out to former and hopefully future co-host of Decoding TV, Jesse Earl, who gave an interview to Salon.com to discuss the trans character in the show Squid Game. Jesse and I also talked about it over the weekend. I think Jesse has some conflicting feelings about this character being played by a cisgender actor, but that it is like largely a net positive. Like overall, it's a net positive role, a net positive depiction, I should say, because it depicts them as fully human, insofar as the show can depict any character as fully human. You know, like every character in the show has 1 to 2 characteristics, basically, and I think the trans character in the show has like 2 to 3 characteristics. It's actually like, you know, above average. And but anyway, I strongly recommend you check out Jesse Earl's interview over at Salon.com. I'll link to it in the show notes. Okay, so those are some of the kind of highlighty things that happen in things to highlight in terms of the sort of South Korean context. One other piece of South Korean context I want to add is I was really curious about why everyone seems to have such massive debt on the show. And Korea is one of the, like, they have the highest, I think, credit card debt per capita or debt per capita. I'm reading here from Hank Ure. Korea tops global household debt to GDP ratio rankings for 4th year running. At the end of last year, South Korea's household debt amounted to just over 100% of its GDP, a slight decrease from the previous year, but still in excess of the nation's GDP, end quote. And I think there's many reasons for this. There's many complex reasons for this. There's low social mobility in Korea. There's a lot of people that take out loans to start small businesses in Korea, and often the loan terms are bad. There's other elements of Korean culture that prizes materialism and consumerism, and as a result of like a combination of all these factors, the financial system, the political system, the culture, there is just like a lot of debt. And so when you see people flash up on the screen in Squid Game seasons 1 and 2, so and so, you have like $100,000 of debt from, you know, from whatever. It's like, oh wow, like everyone has a massive quantity, and it's because there's actually like cultural reasons for this. Obviously, the U.S., we have our own debt issues, credit card debt, student loan debt, massive issues in this country, right? But I think it's a slightly different flavor. I think like in South Korea, like what I'm seeing in movie shows like Squid Game and movies like Parasite is like there's a lot of small business debt. I think that's less so in America. Like most of the people who have debt issues in America are not, hey, I started a small business and it failed. You know, most of it is student loan debt, it's house debt. It's like those kinds of debt. So anyway, which are also issues in South Korea as well, but just like of a different nature, I think. Okay, so Patrick, let's talk about some of the major stuff that happens this season, right? As you indicated, they do go back to the island. And then the first game is the exact same game as the first game in Squid Game season 1. It's red light, green light. And I was a little bit disappointed because I was thinking to myself, "Oh wait, is season 2 just going to be the exact same games? If so, that'll be quite disappointing, right?" It's like Ramin Javadi writing the theme song for House of the Dragon. He's like, "I already made the perfect theme song once. I don't need to write it again." Similarly, he's the creator of the show is like, "I've already thought of the perfect Squid Games. I don't need to do it again." But with a twist, Patrick Klepek, this time Lee Jung Jae's character is in there. He knows how the game is played, and he can warn people. And I actually think that's kind of interesting. There is a metaphor in here for how the creator of Squid Game has returned. Squid Game is an anti-capitalist screed. In the time since Squid Game has come out, Squid Game has become super capitalism. Has capitalism has sunk its claws into Squid Game and has extracted tons of value from Squid Game, right? And then the creator of Squid Game comes back and make another season that pretty much has the same message. There is something metaphorical about Gi-hun's character going back into the Squid Game and trying to warn everyone, hey, not only is this how the game is played, but also we should get out of this game, and no one listening to him. There's something beautiful about that metaphor, I think. But all that said, I thought it's kind of an interesting take. Like, oh, what if the same game, but somebody could warn everyone? How would that play out? Turns out only slightly differently. Patrick Klepek, what did you think?
I had some trepidation of going back, but the visuals of that game are so iconic that I think no creator could resist the opportunity to go back to show the big robot lady and have people going red light, green light. That was sort of inevitable, and then it just became a question of, can you make that repetition interesting enough to have something to chew on? And I think some of the subtle changes that occur here and then across the season are interesting when thought of in the same perspective that you're talking about, of like, what does the creator is coming back in some ways for capitalist reasons to tell this story. Like, how are they going to layer it differently? How is the message?
Right.
How do you shout a message a second time? And in some ways, the way that is addressed is by making the message sharper. There is a dehumanizing language used to describe the participants, specifically the word trash. That is not how the game describes. The game is not derogatory to its participants the first time around. In fact, it's like very positive and uplifting, and if any, or neutral, like at worst. But starting with the recruiter, and like, I think that conversation that they have over the game of Russian roulette, in which he like describes like the participants about like the lower class as subhuman, as trash, as animals. Like, that language then persists and bleeds into how the game describes its participants in a way that is markedly different from how the game describes its participants in season 1. And I think that is of a part in, well, how do you deliver, like, oh, I guess I wasn't blunt enough the first time. Like the form of the games, the form of like what's happened, the system, of course, would just like, we're putting you into little boxes and burning you. Like, you're just turning into ash unless you're lucky enough to have your organs harvested and sold elsewhere. But it sets up a system like where you are subhuman. We're not going to call you that. Well, this time we're going to call you that. Like, you're going to know that like you're lower. That's why you're here. And there's a sharpness to the message this time around that says, I guess I wasn't blunt enough. Right. And so if I'm going to come back here, I'm going to be even blunter and hit you over the head with it. And there's that's done with intentionality, right? Like, there can be messaging themes in art that feels, lacks subtlety because it doesn't know how to do better. There's nothing about that here. Like, there is an artfulness to the bluntness, and I feel that in like the game in which like, if you just shout, we shouldn't do this because I've done this before. None of this is going to work out well for any of you. And it falls on deaf ears. Like, and then also describing his participants as trash, I think go hand in hand with how you handle, how this creator tried to wrestle with, if I'm doing a remix, what am I doing in that remix? And it's to create a blunter object for the message.
I agree, and these are all reasons why the second season is good, Patrick Klepek. I don't know why you didn't like it very much.
I think because I take issue with the remix. Like that's like fundamentally, structurally, like I think it's it does almost as good as it could have possibly done if it was going to choose that structure for its second season. It's just that the opening episodes gestured at something fundamentally different, and then it goes back to its original.
It does fundamentally go back to the games and like repeat many of the dynamics we saw in season 1. But there are some twists, Patrick Klepek. For instance, there's a new clause in the contract this season where players can vote to end the game after every game, like to end the sequence of games after every game.
It's a great change.
And split the prize money after. So they're doing the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style, where like at a certain point you can leave and just take home the money. And that is fascinating because that's a huge part of the second season is the voting, and everyone gets a little patch that indicates like where they voted, and so you can see.
It's part of the patch notes this game designer has delivered to the Squid Games.
Yes, literally patch notes because they're wearing patches now. But anyway, I found that to be super fascinating, Patrick Klepek, and also, by the way, extremely triggering because you're watching people who have seen a heartless overseer preside over the deaths of many of their fellow people, and then voting and saying like, hey, I want more of that. And I can't identify where exactly we've seen that in American society.
We'll have to wait. Eventually
a scenario like that will emerge again. I don't know. It'll probably take like 1,000 years. But eventually we'll see something like that. But like if we were ever to see something like that in American society, I can only imagine our reaction would be revulsion and horror.
Right. If you notice anything, like if you see it yourself, decodingtv@gmail.com. Write in. Let us know if you see it out in the world.
If you see anything like a scenario that I just described, where like people see, like a heartless system result in all these deaths and horrors inflicted upon people, and then voting and saying, I want more of that. Please give me more of the bad thing.
I also need to point out that I recently underwent a procedure and I deleted November 2024 from my memory. So if that is contributing to any sort of issues, I just know I have an asterisk.
Yeah. So you have a lot to be brought up to speed on potentially. Anyway, obviously things like Conclave, the movie Conclave, which also has like election-related themes, and Squid Game Season 2 were written and made long before the election this year. But the fact that they have some resonance, I think, shows that there's something really smart about it. I mean, you kind of rolled your eyes at me, but do you not agree that there is some really interesting parallels and like thematically rich material the show is mining here?
No, of course. No, I was rolling my eyes at you.
My boom ghost.
As you stumbled into it, I saw it coming from a mile away. As Dave, like, you don't have to open the door. It's like, Dave's gonna open the door. No, and I think that's like, I think that's the show at its best, like finding new territory. Again, it's my frustrations with the season like have more to do with structure than in theme or even what it does within that is just like I've seen a lot of this before, but like what it mines in that territory is rich and new and interesting. And I think does the best with the cards it's like sort of presented to play out, and finds really interesting ways for you to get into that material and stuff that, like, you're right, like that stuff does not feel, it's taking existing structures but adding nuance in how it's presented that just makes you look at the games, the characters, the political dynamics both in and outside of the games in a totally different light. So I'm with you that it's very resonant. I think it's the kind of thing that will help the show hold up over time because it's, sure, it feels very reflective of our current political moment, but and reflective of the ascendancy of like strongmen, dictator types like across the world. It's not exclusive to the U.S. At all, but because it's not, there's not no one dressed up in an orange wig, so it doesn't like slot itself to like this current moment. It slots itself to like things like the ebb and flow of like what populations have chosen to inflict upon themselves in the search of ascendancy from their situation. And all of us as a society do this over and over again, even if the rewards never quite exist. And I think it'll help allow Squid Game to stand the test of time, because it's not a pop culture reference. It's just a cultural reference, which is important.
Yeah, and I think also putting aside the strongman component of it, just this idea of I'm gonna get what's mine. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if a lot of people are gonna die. Like I need to get what's good for me, and I think that is a mentality certainly that I see in American society today. That is applicable for don't know how applicable that exact mentality is in South Korea, but certainly it is something we see here in America. Hey, one other major twist: Player 001 is the frontman. And I was talking with David Cho, and he was commenting on how much more expensive season 2 seems of Squid Game than season 1. Lee Byung-hun, very famous actor from South Korea. I was trying to get like what an analogous actor would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking Tom Cruise, but David Cho suggested to me Brad Pitt would actually be a better actor, right? And so, like, imagine Brad Pitt shows up for a cameo in season 1, right? He probably shoots for like 3 to 5 days in season 1.
He did this in Deadpool 2, right? Like, shows up during an opening sequence. Brad Pitt specifically shows up during an opening sequence of Deadpool 2, only to then die immediately in like the opening sequence of Deadpool 2. You think, oh my gosh, he's gonna be this character for the movie. No, and then he's out of there, because of course you wouldn't have Brad Pitt too. Brad Pitt,
Right, but it's like
film.
now imagine Brad Pitt like appears in like season 1 for
Mm-hmm.
a few scenes, and then he is a regular on season 2. He's one of the main actors on season 2. That would be like, wow.
If you're gonna say, like, if Netflix is gonna show up the Brink truck,
right.
I had a question for you when I realized this is what the show was doing, because it introduced some tension, but also, like, of course he's going to betray everybody at some point, so it's kind of an odd dance the show is doing. Do you think, because we talked about this when we talked about episode 1, would the show have shown us the front man's face in season 1 if it thought it was going to do in season 2, like, to insert him into the games? Because it sure seems like it would have been way more delicious and satisfying to not have the audience going like, of course this villain is going to do a villainous thing at some point, but instead to have the front man revealed to be this character that had been insidious all along. Like, I thought, all I could do was think about that all season long. I was like, oh, I mean, this is fun, but it would have been so much more fun if he could have revealed his mask. And you're just like, that would have been, you want to end season 2 like, like that reveal of like he was there with you all along and you didn't know it. Boom, that's how you end a season.
Yeah, I don't know. Hard to say. I mean, I think they clearly Lee Byung-hun was interested in doing the show, and so they were able to get him to do the show. And they're like, "Hey, if you want to do the show, play the same character. And what's an interesting thing you could do in the show? Oh, you could be in the game yourself, right?
And he's great.
Rather than yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say he's terrific. Like, he is a real highlight of the season.
Absolutely. He tells his own backstory about how he ended up in the game, perhaps based partially in real life. But he's also acting real suspicious a lot of the time, right? Like, there's that time during the merry-go-round game when he vanishes, and then he comes back, and it's like, hey, what was the team that you were part of? Unclear. So yeah, but huge twist. And I agree with you, Patrick, that we're deprived the moment of, oh, the guy, like, the thing is, I think Gihan at this point still doesn't know that the front man was player 001 as of the end of the season. So that is still a shoe left to drop, and him finding out. So I think that will still be like a really big moment.
But for him, but it's a situation where the audience is so far ahead of the player, and I just can't help but like, wonder, like, if you could, there's nothing you can do. The season 1 is what it was.
But we already had a thing where the audience didn't know that the player was in on it, right? And that was in season 1. So they're trying a different approach this time with some dramatic irony for us. Anyway, what else happens this season? There's a few other things to discuss. I mean, let's talk about the games themselves. So, this is an abridged season because out of the 7 episodes, we only got 3 games, right? And I knew when we got to like episode 4 or 5 or whatever that we were only like 1 game in, or 2 games. I'm like, we're not going to see all 6 games this season.
Mm-hmm.
Very disappointing. So there's the 6 legs game where players need to compete in a series of mini games. And then there's the merry-go-round game where players need to assemble in specific numerical groups and then run into a small room before the time is up, or else they will all be killed. And I'm curious what you think of these games. I have to say that, again, one of the things that I really appreciated about some of the games in season 1 was that you could outsmart them. Specifically, the tug of war game, to some degree, the marble game, and what was the other game in season 1 that you could theoretically outsmart? But anyway,
or like there's at least like red light, green light is just like, move, don't move. Like,
yeah,
and like there's
the honeycomb game. The honeycomb.
Yes.
Game, right?
Yes.
And so theoretically, those are all games that like you can use your brains to some degree to like make the game easier or harder for you. And I do think what is a little bit disappointing about season 2's games are there's not that much mental skill involved, in my opinion. It's mostly physical skills, right? It's mostly, can you throw a thing? Can you do the hacky sack? Can you can you do the dice? Which, by the way, looks incredibly impressive when people are able to execute it. But it's mostly just like the games themselves I find to be like less mentally stimulating than the first season. I don't know what you think, Patrick Klepek, as a games person yourself.
No, I'm with you. And they're so team centric, and like there was in previous games, like there was a way like you as an individual in many instances could survive. Like maybe you benefit from the knowledge of others. Like when like, hey, turns out if you lick this thing, it's going to make it easier. Small aside, one of my favorite scenes in the whole season is when he has the nightmare where he tells them pick the
triangle,
the triangle, and it turns to be this like complete monstrosity. Like I was like, that's really good. They don't overplay it. They don't have him nightmares about a bunch of the games and his recommendations, but I really enjoyed that. But I'm with you. There's the show essentially makes a decision like the games this time are broadly going to be based on teams, and maybe that is going to like be like part of a broader thematic like metaphor that it's playing with, like, hey, single people cannot make much of a difference. Like it truly is like, what do we collectively decide? We all collectively decide to like be anarchists and not like help one another. Well, then we made that choice. That's the choice we're making. And so I could see a version of this like season 2 and 3 choosing to do team-based games out of a sense of like, hey, that is kind of like more reflective, like what we need to do to take down these structures. We actually do have to work together. But from just a like, this is a clever game designer that is like building interesting systems to watch and see how it's filmed. Like inherently, it was like less interesting to multiple times be rooting like just there was a sense of randomness to the winning and losing.
Yes,
I mean, even like I loved watching like the little mini games, but as I watched the first team, I'm sitting there going, are we really? Like, this isn't going to be interesting to watch 7 times. And they get over that by only doing it twice.
Right. It's a montage. And I will say what is cool is a lot of the main teams game, when they go through it, is done in one shot. Not all of it, like, but they do like the first couple games in one long continuous shot. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty impressive. Like that they did it in all. Like they show you there's something real going on there, right? But yeah, I agree. Like largely, the games sadly are less interesting this time.
I will say Mingle. I loved that. Like that was the one where I kept like that's the one that captured both my kids. Like they were off doing something else, had headphones on, and then both came over and like, what is this game? And then sure enough, my 8-year-old I ended up turning it off like halfway through and finishing it on my iPad. So the gunshot like I'd be watching. They not being paying attention, they would hear gunshots like, oh, did more people die in the game, Daddy? I was like, yes, more people died in the game, kids. And then my 8-year-old went and found on Roblox. She asked what was the game, and I was like, it's called Mingle. And she went on Roblox and found themed around the game already. And she was like, what's the rules? And like, oh, well, there's going to be a number and blah, yeah. So I explained all the rules to her, and she sat and did that for 20 minutes. And so I found Mingle to be a real highlight. Like, yes, there's an element of chance and randomness, but I found that to be like the pairing up to be really satisfying to watch in the different ways that characters dealt with like how all that worked out. So even though Mingle was less of a can you singularly outsmart it, I found the spectacle of it, the design of it, like look, man, spend the money. Like it looked like an expensive physical set, but it was a joy to watch.
Well, all of the sets in season 2 have been incredible. Or just like you're just not used to seeing physical spaces that large decorated and configured in that way just in your life. And so the fact that they look like real sets, they look like they actually built them, it really is impressive. And I mean, what'd you think of all these characters, Patrick Klepek? Because I have to say, I found myself pretty invested in most of their journeys. We get the YouTube Bitcoin guy who's ripped off a lot of people, his pregnant girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, I should say, the trans woman who's also ex-special forces, Thanos the rapper, even
so Thanos worked for you? That was like the big thing that didn't really work at all. I don't know if it was like fundamentally, I like had trouble getting past the Thanos part of it. I found that to be goofy and uninteresting, and maybe that's like shallow and like I nothing about that. Almost nothing about that character worked to me. All the other characters I found to be much like they needed a villain. And I was like, how do we do a different kind of villain? And so Thanos kind of becomes sort of like the equivalent of like the mobster character from the first season. And I just found him deeply unlikable, but not in the like the fun unlikable way, in the every time you're on screen, I wish somebody else was on screen sort of way. And so the name, the fingers with the Infinity Stones, I found it extreme, as my 8-year-old likes to tell me when I'm doing something she doesn't like, Dad, you're being cringe. I found that character to be cringeworthy as opposed to like something to be feared. And so he's a central character. He takes up a lot of oxygen in terms of sowing discontent in the season, and almost none of him worked for me. Whereas pretty much every other character did, and I would have preferred more time with any of them than more time with Thanos, and he's upset about his coin losses. Like it's very funny that happened right after there's all these legal questions happening over the Hawktua girl and like her I couldn't help but think of that as this was playing out, because it felt very illustrative of a weird moment we're in with the buying and dipping of influencer coins. But
if there was a Squid Game in the United States, it would not be a shock to see Haley Welch in the Squid Game.
It would not.
But
it sounds like this character like either worked or didn't bother you as much as it did for me.
I wouldn't say it worked, but I would agree with you that he's a very polarizing character, right? And I think it's either going to work for you or it's going to annoy the shit out of you. And it sounds like for you is the latter. And I completely understand. I'm not going to defend Thanos as a character. I think the thing that bothered me most is that Thanos was allowed to sneak in performance-enhancing drugs into the game. Like that does not feel realistic to me.
And it's not addressed at any point, right? Like it would make sense to me that a layer you could have gotten in the second season was in the same way that the forks are put in. Like, look, they're rigging the game. Like they're messing with like the idea that you could get a 1-up on the competition for like because of X, Y, or Z reason. Sure, that makes sense to me. But instead, it's just sort of this. In the same way that they can't lock a door at the end of the season to stop the uprising from happening, like they also just let this guy sneak in a bunch of drugs like through his cross. Just doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
I will say, I think my favorite storyline with the characters this season is probably between. I mean, many of the storylines are good. The Marine dude, Kang Dae-ho, is the guy who's like in the Marines or whatever, and then he has like the full blown panic situation. At the end of the season, very powerful. Reminded me a lot of Saving Private Ryan, where a character has a similar episode at the end of that movie. But the one that really got to me was the Park Yong-sik is the name of the character. and he has his mom is in the game, which
Mhm.
is something that we haven't seen before in the first game. Also, Park Young Sik apparently played by someone who's very famous in South Korea as well. Like, most of the people are famous. We should
Sure.
make clear, and this season had like a lot more instances of people in the game knowing each other from outside the game. But yeah, having a mother and a son be in the game is a really interesting dynamic, and just having that motherly character, I think it's a very like it's this Asian mom archetype that I think many of us will recognize and find to be very endearing. And so yeah, like all the side characters worked for me, and the fact that they're able to introduce you to like a whole bunch of new characters, I thought that you care about and are invested in, I thought was its own achievement personally.
Oh yeah, I mean the character's name slips from me. She's during the assault that happens later. Like she ends up getting brutally murdered. While the guy while the kid like with the one the guy is up above like waiting like could have
Yeah,
like that character was great, and like the way that she is taken out is like so unceremonious and like brutal and upsetting. Like the show still finds way in its ultra violence to be shocking, and like find ways to like let a character into your heart and then all of a sudden just rip it out. I found that the mother and son dynamic to be really, even though it might be an archetype, I thought it plays on that archetype. Like it tries to pull it as far as it can, which like this son is pathetic. Like he is like utterly like where he has arrived in life, like, and like his inability to admit like where he has messed up, and this mother's inability to like admit that like he could do anything wrong, even though she shames him. But like when push comes to shove, like she will defend him to, like to her dying breath, because that's her son. I found that to be their dynamic, especially in Mingle, like right, like that is like
yeah,
there's a bunch of heart stopping moments with them as like the son gets dragged. Well, does he get
yeah.
dragged
Oh,
away or he lets himself get dragged away? Who
I
can?
thought he legit. That was the thing. I thought he legit got dragged away.
I
That
think he
was
was.
my
I think he was trying. I think he was unable to get away, and
yeah.
fortunately, she's able to survive. But it was that was a emblematic of their relationship in general, of like somebody who like professes a deep love and probably does love his mom, but like continually puts himself in terrible situations that also puts his mother in equally terrible situations, in a spot where like at her age you should be the one looking out for her and finding ways to protect her, and she's always the one that has to step up and find ways to protect him. I found all that to be uh really rewarding.
I wanted to mention one other thing about the voting. By the way, we talked about the voting dynamics and what people are voting for, but um, what is interesting this season is people are able to split the money, and it becomes more and more appealing as time goes on, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think I did the math, and it starts with like, oh, after the first game, I think it's or the first couple games, like $15,000 or something. So it's like, oh, okay, that's not really going to make any difference at all. But it's like one more. So then by the end, they have like 150 grand or something like that, which is like, oh, that's actually a decent. But then everyone is still like one more game,
Yeah.
right? Everyone is still saying one more game, and I think there is this meme or trend online that the reason people don't want to tax billionaires is because they see themselves as a future billionaire.
Hmm.
Right, like you see yourself as like, oh, I'm just like, I don't want to tax billionaires because like I'm gonna be one day. I don't want those taxes on me. And it's like, well, the likelihood you're gonna become a billionaire is like nothing, you know. And it reminded me of that kind of trope in American society where people think they're just millionaires in waiting, and similarly, people are like, just one more game, but they don't understand like the cost to the one more game. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. Okay, couple more things to talk about. I do want to mention that there is a subplot with this woman, Kang No Yul, I believe, who plays a triangle character and also a sniper in the game. And she is trying to find her daughter from North Korea, who she abandoned. That is her subplot. My wife, who I was watching the show was, has a extremely strong suspicion that that daughter is Jun Hee, also in the games. I don't know if you
Oh.
recognize that, but there's a scene where Jun Hee says, "My parents are gone." You know, like she's like, "I don't have parents."
Oh shit!
And it's like that's probably the mom.
Your wife just
what
revealed a twist in this show for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if she's right, but yeah,
That sounds pretty.
you know the scene I'm talking about. Jun Hee's like asked, like I think they're like escaping, right? Or they're walking into that like MC Escher staircase
Mm-hmm,
area,
mm-hmm.
and somebody asks like, Jun Hee, what about your parents? And she's like, I don't have parents. Like it's like, okay, well that's
It feels like
what,
like you're like they
yeah,
spend enough. There's several scenes focusing on this pursuit of this child that it would be very odd if there was not resolution on
right.
it. And it would be odd if the resolution was, and she's dead. Like,
Yeah. I think the behind the scenes of the game stuff in general just does not work for me at all, Patrick Klepek. And I think it's because Squid Game is one of those worlds where it's like John Wick, in my opinion, where the more you look at it, the closer you look at it, the less it makes any goddamn sense at all, in my opinion. And in the case of Squid Game, here's what doesn't make sense. First of all, I like that they throw in a line in this episode or in this season where they say, because in season 1, for those who don't remember, they had this organ harvesting business on the
it's
side.
back.
And the way they did it in season 1 was they had players in the game who was like a doctor do the organ harvesting, and in exchange for information about future games. Horrible system. Horrible system, right? And they acknowledge that in the season. They're like, the character says, hey, we're not doing it like last time. We're not having players in the game harvest the organs anymore. We have our own doctors this time. which just makes me understand. First of all, why were you doing that in the first place? That's the stupidest plan ever. Because for starters, it's possible that your guy's going to die in the first game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then your whole harvesting empire is over. But anyway, so that's a thing that happens this season, and they kind of whenever the harvesting thing happens, I'm thinking to myself like, how is this possible? The bodies go in the cremation thing, and then they press a button, and then the body falls down into a chute or what. It's like, okay, well, clearly someone freaking built that thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. The more you think about it, the less sense it makes. I do like that they give the sniper woman some backstory of, hey, when I came here, it was for the love of sniping. Like the reason I took this job was for the love of sniping these.
I got a craft, and I just want to use it.
Yeah, I don't just want to. I'm not here just to make money. I'm here to snipe, right? I'm here to like shoot people in the head and put them out of their misery. That's what I'm here for. And they do. She is in it for the love of the game, right? Like she's not in it for anything else. And I like that. I do like that. There's this kind of rogue agent who doesn't want to be harvesting organs and instead just wants to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. But everything else about the behind the scenes, I'm thinking to myself, how are they feeding these people? How, not only do you have hundreds of people that you need to vanish and then you don't hear from them and society doesn't ask any questions, but also the hundreds of people that are maintaining this whole thing, right? Like, anyway, Patrick Klepek, are you interested in where Sniper Woman plot goes?
No.
Yeah.
Like that when I saw them harvesting organs again, I was like, really? We're doing this subplot a second time?
Yeah.
And we get no resolution. Like, it's sort of just forgotten by the end of this season, which again, I think is because it hasn't been forgotten. It's just resolved later in the actual end of season 2 that will happen later in 2025. But I'm with you. Like, when you do something as high concept as Squid Game, like the dance you're doing is like, at some point you got to kind of reveal the man behind the curtain and sort of like what's going on. But like, you can do that in a way that sort of overwhelms the audience with like a bunch of answers that don't have to make a bunch of sense towards the end. Or you can do it like this, which is like, it's revealing a little bit at a time, but because you're revealing a little bit at a time, like you're peeling back the orange a little bit. I'm thinking about the orange a lot, and I don't think there's a lot underneath like that peel. And that's fine, because that's not what the show isn't about, like the world building. But again, once you extend the narrative, like you've got to find things to fit it in. And I don't think this show in the first season or the second season has found particularly compelling storylines for the behind the scenes intrigue. Like there's a lot of time spent with the VIPs in season 1 that is just not particularly interesting. Obviously the bad acting.
Thankfully, no VIPs this season.
No
so that's
VIP.
good.
Well, not yet. But like there's not much illuminating other than wow, they're bad. Like they work better as
right
villains in your head than they are in.
I agree.
And here the Squid Game, the infrastructure works better as like the iconography. It's so mysterious. They're so meticulous.
Unknowable how they maintain this.
Unknowable is the answer because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like the logistics of the show like do not matter. And I don't think the show is drifting in a direction where like it feels like it needs to answer all the logistics in order to provide a satisfying resolution. I do not think that's where the show is going. But in the meantime, like you kind of can't help but like think about that stuff sometimes in a way where if we just didn't spend any time behind the scenes, you can just have them putting in these mysterious caskets and burning them. And like, wow, that's weird. I don't understand how that works, but it doesn't matter because we're not spending any time there. But the moment you humanize these people, you start thinking about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And it doesn't ruin the show. But I agree with you that the show is not, maybe it's all part of a long game and like it's going to be worth to have those investments and it'll pay off in season 3. But so far, that still kind of feels like the show twiddling its fingers. Like, we should really, how do we go behind the scenes to show what's going on? And I don't know, writ large, that the show has gained all that much from taking us behind the curtain instead of just spending more time with the characters in the games. I think that would have resulted in a better show.
Well, speaking of twiddling their thumbs, I think the other big waste is the Jun-Ho storyline, which initially starts out quite interesting, and then by the end it's clear they're just literally treading water, not going anywhere. Now there is a big reveal at the end of season 2. The captain is
can a completely telegraphed idea be a big reveal?
Really? You weren't surprised? You weren't surprised by that, Patrick Klepek?
The more you thought, so this might actually be the way this might be a clever way of addressing something we talked about when we addressed the first episode. I was like, how did they find that guy? It's like, well, maybe because they meant to find that guy.
Yeah, that is a great explanation. Is now, what was the long-term plan, Patrick? Shoot him in the shoulder, have my friend Captain find him,
but I can,
and then lead him astray, right? Yeah,
David.
But I agree with you. This does explain another kind of massive quote unquote not plot hole, but like unexplained component, which is how did anyone find Jun-Ho randomly off the coast of this island? It's because the captain was in on it the whole time, and he has apparently been sent there to lead Jun-Ho astray. So that is
correct. He wants to keep his brother alive, and like the way he is doing that is by letting him fruitlessly search.
We assume.
I assume like, and that does feel like in a convoluted way a satisfying enough explanation for what's going on here. But it's to your point. This feels like a plot device introduced. We spent a decent amount of time with it, and then it's just like, all right, chess piece. Sit on that side of the board till inevitably they're going to find out about the deception, realize that they're close, and obviously invade the games in season 3.
Right. Well, speaking of invading the games, that's the final point, right? Which is that at the very end of season 2, during a night of chaos, Gi-hun decides to hatch a plan to actually turn the tables on his captors and break out of the games. And I actually thought this was really cool. It reminded me a lot of The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, which, by the way, The Matrix is explicitly referenced in the show, where there's this whole layer that's below/above the existing game layer that people are in, and they have now broken out of it. They are now in the next layer, like the behind the scenes, the purple hallways and all that stuff. And I found it to be like really thrilling and transgressive, and with some subplots in there, like I said earlier, with the Marine gentleman, Daeho, trying to find the magazines, and Cho Hyunju trying to make sure everyone survives, and then Gi-hun ultimately finds that the fallout of all his good intentions is his friend gets executed. Jung Bae gets executed by the frontman at the end of the show in heartbreaking fashion. I want to throw a shout out to Jesse Earl, who provided this insight when I talked with her about the show, which was at the end of the show, the frontman says, "Hey, do you see the cost of playing hero now? This is the cost of playing hero," and that was a really interesting because in Gihan's mind, he's not trying to play hero; he's just trying to help these people. But that the frontman can only conceptualize Gihan's actions in the context of playing hero, right? And that they have like different ideas of what Gihan's motivations are. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting idea. But I thought this is pretty cool, like, and had some nice little mini subplots, and it's just really incredible to see like these games that are run in such an orderly fashion go so wildly, chaotically out of control. I found a thrill in that. Patrick Klepek, what did you think of how season 2 wrapped up?
I found a thrill in it as it played out. I don't know that necessarily by the plan is this main character who wants to spend so much time helping people, putting himself at risk in different games, comes to the conclusion that, well, we must sacrifice the majority of our friends in order to take a very risky ploy that has no real chance it's succeeding, but maybe, just maybe, if we allow all these people to innocently die and not protect them, I guess we could get the guns. It just feels I didn't buy it's everything that happens after that is like fun and thrilling. That felt out of character. I didn't feel like the character was at that moment, that kind of breaking point where they were willing to be so sacrificial of everything they'd sort of built up to at that point to try and take this kind of risky endeavor to take everything out. I also didn't buy, again, this is where I'm thinking about the logistics of the world. They don't have any other way to like put, like, no one has ever tried to take a gun over the course of these many decades.
Right.
Like there isn't like an automatic locking like there's a chip in the guns that like they just turn off. Like there's a biome, you know what I mean? Like this is such
Right.
a, like they're in a control room with all these big buttons and they press the buttons and the sliders and like that door can't just shut. Like they can't just shut that door. They got to press that button outside the door. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like
there's no like locked, like they haven't foreseen this scenario, and like there's a lockdown button.
If the door just locks, they're done. like plan over. So like that stuff you kind of just have to go with, and I just didn't really. I didn't buy I didn't buy this character making this like really upsetting decision this late in the season. I didn't really buy the plan. I didn't buy the response to the plan by like the organizers, and so that part I had trouble getting over. But the thrill of, I mean, like just how it's shot. Like I will say, like in general, like the cinematography of this season was exquisite. Like it's so thrilling to watch, like a beauty to behold. I really feel like the lighting in particular was like exceptional this season. And so the shootout is an incredible action sequence. I just didn't really buy the logistics. It felt like we need to get to this moment with the front man and the friend getting executed. Like, how do we get there? Well, thrilling action sequence. Like, how would that really play out in this world? Don't think about it too much. And so I found that part to be, I kind of had to turn my brain off, but in turning my brain off, I was treated to a truly exceptional action sequence. And I like where we end up with these characters, like where all the characters are. I don't really know what this third season is. Like, there's a tease that we can get into that certainly suggests a return to the structure, to the games, but where it leaves everyone emotionally, I think is a interesting place for everything to be.
I agree with you that Gihan's plan is bad to begin with, because his whole idea is we got to stop the front man, and that's going to stop the games. And did you not just see that when the guy in charge of the games in season 1 died, the games kept going? Like, why?
Right.
Why do you think? Maybe there's a bigger infrastructure motivating these games than just one guy. Maybe consider that, and it doesn't seem like he considers that. And so, if you have to be able to get over that in order for any of this to make sense. And if you can't get over that, I understand, because it's a really massive plot hole. But anyway, I found it to be like really interesting and transgressive, and essentially for Gihan, the hero of the show, for his plan to be a complete and utter failure. And all that having been said, I really enjoyed season 2. I thought there were some great insights about human nature and society and wealth inequality. But I also agree with you, it ends really abruptly. Like the whole boat subplot is just literally in the middle of the sea somewhere. Gi-hun has just realized that his intentions are like have led to ruin. His friend is dead. The frontman is back out of the game, like back in charge of the game, and it's like, oh, okay, it's a big cliffhanger. It's a big cliffhanger. I'm going to read here from an interview that the creator of the show gave to Variety.com. Squid Game creator has talked about some of his motivations for ending the season this way, and kind of what he intended for season 3. Hwang Dong-hyuk is the creator's name. He says, quote, "When I first wrote the story of seasons 2 and 3, it was one long story arc. And I was originally planning to write the story across a span of about 8 to 9 episodes, but once I finished the story, it came to over 10 episodes, which I thought was too long to contain in a single season. So I wanted to have an adequate point where I could give closure as a second season and then move on with a third. And when you look at Gi-hun's story, all of his attempts that he puts to stop the game, the first one being getting these mercenaries and trying to plant a tracking device, that goes to fail. The second attempt of trying to persuade people to vote, that goes to fail as well. And then the third and last attempt of bringing people together and causing a rebellion, it also goes to fail. All of these failures lead to this heavy, heavy crisis of having to lose his best friend at the hands of the front man. When you think about Gi-hun's journey, I thought that was an adequate moment to put a stop and give him a little bit more of closure along that long story arc. And then from that moment on, in the third season, having that sense of huge guilt and sense of failure weighing heavily on him, how is Gi-hun going to carry on his mission? That's the story that'll further unfold." End quote. Patrick Klepek, are you convinced?
I believe that, but I think I believe it because I think you see it in the storytelling. Like I don't think that explanation betrays, like, I still think he wrote what, like, it's one big story. It was a story conceived of for a single season. I'm glad that he's getting an opportunity to expand it and not condense it. It does feel like there's enough here to cover that much ground.
Right.
But I think it's also true that an arbitrary stopping point was picked. Like in the midst, it's not a natural season conclusion. It's an emotional conclusion, like for this
character, for this one
character.
Component of this character.
Correct. But I think he sort of, gives away the game, so to speak, here. It's like, I wrote one season. It's a long season. We're splitting it in two so it can tell the whole story. And that's great. So it's maybe less, craven than one might I think, given like how the show has been talked about, why it was expanded to begin with. But nonetheless, it does feel like we're getting an arbitrary sort of stopping point, and that it'll feel like it's why I'm kind of reserved some of my criticism, because it really feels like they're just arbitrarily holding back a bunch of episodes, and I'm look forward to having a more complete impression of what this creator wanted to say when I can see everything they wanted to say, because it doesn't feel like we got that. And so in some ways it feels like we're reviewing, this happens a lot of time. Like a lot of the reviews that you read of television series that come out around the launch,
they get like 4 episodes of
8 episodes. And it feels like what we have here is we have reviewed half of Squid Game season 2. And so I'm left incomplete, unresolved, but by the very nature, the season is incomplete and unresolved. And so it doesn't, it is what it is. They're calling it a season 2. I call the balls and strikes. I'm judging it based on what I have in front of me. But I'm very hopeful that it'll be a much more complete picture when we get a chance to watch the final season.
Well, speaking of the final season, there has been a leak. First of all, Netflix posted a teaser on their social media, on Threads, for instance. They said, "Everyone say hi to Cholsu." And we see kind of a male equivalent to the girl gigantic robot doll from season 1 and 2. So it implies that we are going back to the game somehow. Unclear exactly the mechanics under which that will take place. Obviously, the people who are part of Squid Game are going to have to forgive and forget a lot of things that happen at the end of this season in order for the games to go on in a rational way. But in addition, Netflix Korea briefly had a video go live that had a specific release date for Squid Game Season 3, which has not been officially confirmed or announced yet. So maybe this is fake or a temporary date, or it's not accurate. But the date that did go live was June 27th, 2025, which does feel like a reasonable time frame for this to go live.
It's before the 4th of July holiday where
Yeah.
a lot of people have time off to watch the episodes. That makes
Yeah.
a ton of sense.
Yeah. So that seems to be when we're going to be getting season 3. But Patrick, I knew you'd be really pissed that this was basically half a season, and I'm sorry you didn't have a great experience. I am mildly irritated that it's only half a season, but I found the show overall to be a thrilling return to form and still have something new to say. And so I would still strongly recommend Squid Game season 2.
As would I. I do.
Really?
Really? Yes. Again, it's a reservations, born out of expectations, and so there's
So
no
still
world.
very good, even despite what you said.
Yeah, there's no world where if you watch the first season, you shouldn't watch
Right.
the second season. Like this is not that kind of fall off by any measure.
Yeah. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.